Welcome everyone to this evening's By the Book virtual event celebrating our Spring 2022 Phoenix Poets Series books. This event series was born of the pandemic and is done in partnership with the Seminary Co-op Bookstore here in Chicago. You'll see in the chat that I've posted links to the book pages for tonight's 3 poetry books from the Seminary Co-op. If you're interested in purchasing the books and supporting a wonderful local bookstore, I highly suggest ordering through the co-op. I've also posted a link in the chat to the University of Chicago Press YouTube channel, where the recording of tonight's event will go live in about a week from now. So feel free to check that out and share it with folks whenever it's up. My name is Adrienne Myers. I'm a promotions manager at the University of Chicago Press. I'm lucky enough to work with our fantastic Phoenix poets. Tonight, we will have 3 readers. First up will be Alan Shapiro, who has written many books of poetry and prose, most recently Against Translation, That Self-Forgetful, Perfectly Useless Concentration, and Reel to Reel, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Shapiro has won the Kingsley Tufte Award, the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and an American Academy of Arts and Letters Literature Award, among others, and has received fellowships from both the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts. He currently lives in Durham, North Carolina with his dog, Sammy, and his newest collection, Proceed to Check Out, is now available. And second reader tonight will be Stewart Dichelle, who's the author of 6 collections of poetry, including Dig Safe, Backwards Days, Children with Enemies, the latter of which is also published by the University of Chicago Press. His first collection, Good Hope Road, was selected for the National Poetry Series, and he's received fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts, and Ledig Roholt Foundation. He teaches at the MFA program in creative writing at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. And his new book, The Lookout Man, is what he'll be reading from tonight. And last but not least, we will have a reading from Peter Balakian, who's the author of 8 books, including Ozone Journal, which won the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, and Ziggurat, which is also published by the University of Chicago Press. His memoir, Black Dog of Fate, won the Penn Albrand Award and was a New York Times notable book. And The Burning Tigris won the Raphael Lemkin Prize and was a New York Times bestseller and notable book. He's the Donald M. and Constance H. Rebar Professor of Humanities in the Department of English at Colgate University. With all of these impressive bios done, I'm going to ask everyone to keep themselves muted through the duration of the reading, and I'm going to turn over the reins to our first poet, Alan Shapiro.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to read 2 poems. The first one, in honor of the Zoom event, is called Zoom. The person addressed in the poem is my late sister, Beth, and the TV show that's alluded to is Hollywood Squares, which won't surprise anybody. But anyway, the poem is called Zoom. In the hospice where you died, a lot of money was spent to make the place conform to someone's algorithm of a home. Shag carpeted lobby, wood paneled elevator, particle board furniture with shrink wrap, thin mahogany veneer, faux marble, linoleum tiles. There were paintings of chickens in a barnyard on the walls of every room. The homier they made it, the more clinical it felt. You, of course, were out of it by then. The earthsat's hominess was for the living, not the almost dead. And on the rare occasions when you woke and tried to talk, I could only hear enough of what you murmured to know how far away you were from anything I knew, alone in a remoteness that today seems almost familiar, though no less remote. Like hospice, you might say, by another name. My face isolated in a square stacked with the squares of friends and family. Inside the screen-sized square, our separate boxes make together. Boxes talking box to box, as in a bar or restaurant face to face, as in a pre-posthumous world of host and game show faces, mummified to pasty smiles of dead celebrities, still quipping, how many balls on a pool table? Depends on how many men are playing pool. I think I hear you in our edgy laughter, as if we'd won a one-way ticket to a last resort, a club med of an island rendezvous, a hidden herded horde of eye germs doing anything to keep alive and still be seen and heard. Funny how signing off, no matter who I wave to, it's you I always see wave back at me. The two of us together once again in a lost dimension, as if we're both on ship and shore, stranded, departing, waving till the square goes mute and blackens, and the room with just myself inside it feels so unreal, I'm virtually nowhere where you are. And the next poem is a little longer, not too much longer, and it's the last one I'm going to read. It's called Uncle Hi, and there's nothing you need to know about it. Yeah, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Uncle Hi, and it's in 8 parts. Uncle Hi. 1, I never knew why or how his doctor's bag ended up on a shelf in a side room of our cellar. In so remote a corner, whoever put it there must not have wanted anyone to ever find it. When I discovered it, exploring the netherworld of what I lived above, it looked exotically Methuselahan, like the kind of bag old Doc Adams on Gunsmoke carried with him through the dust-hazy streets of Dodge, its brown leather fissured like alligator skin with a loose leather handle to which a tiny key was tied. It fit the lock on the bronze buckle, and the bag, which was rounded at the top when it was closed, became balky, rectangular when the key turned and the bag snapped open. A centipede crawled out. A chilly odor, medicinal and stale, rose from the dark inside it. At the bottom lay a tray of empty slots and small compartments. In a large side pocket, I found a pair of tweezers, a tiny bottle of iodine, the lens of a magnifying glass without the frame, a packet of bandages, and a tongue depressor that slipped from its crinkly package looked like the stick part of a popsicle. From the pocket opposite, I pulled out a stethoscope whose ear tips had been snapped or cut off and whose chest piece was cracked. So when I tried to listen to my heart the way Doc Adams did whenever someone on the show was shot or sick, moving the chest piece over chest and stomach while saying kindly, "Take a deep breath, son. Now out, now in, again, again." No sound but my own voice came through the tubing. 2, I was a baby when Uncle Hi was diagnosed with lung cancer. 3 months later, he was dead. There was one picture taken of him just after the war on the mantelpiece above our unused fireplace. He's at the beach and his toddler son, Jeffrey, wearing a white sailor hat, is in his lap. The camera catches Jeffrey squirming in Hi's arm. The child's eyes shut tight, mouth grimacing, his body all rigid torque as if he's being beaten up by ghosts, while Hi stares calmly, smiling at the camera, an unlit cigarette in the corner of his mouth. He's tanned, handsome, and with his trim mustache, he's a dead ringer for Tyrone Power. Everyone used to say that, and such a nice guy too, salt of the earth, give you the shirt off his back, though this was offered in a tone of bafflement, as if his kindness somehow didn't add up, was the last thing you'd expect given something else about him that they never mentioned, at least not in front of children. 3, I knew enough to keep the bag a secret. Upstairs and down, that house was crisscrossed with tripwires of rules, limits, prohibitions, and restrictions, many of which you didn't know about until you broke them. It was like what Dodge appeared to be at the opening of every episode, a pokey yet bustling town of quaint stagecoaches, covered wagons, and cowboys on horseback, all maneuvering peacefully somehow through the one street while merchants, farmers, and corseted women with piled up hair that little hats held in place stroll up and down the wooden sidewalks past the general store, the jail, the bank, the louvered saloon doors swinging open and closed on happy drinkers, and all the while abrasions of tone and gesture and missteps too slight to notice under everybody's noses were building up past umbrage into rage, in the wake of which, in a black frock coat, brown bag in hand, old Doc Adams would come running. 4, the day I find the bag, Hi has been long dead, and Jeffrey, whom I never met, is grown and living in a halfway house for troubled men. I'm standing on a chair with the bag open beside me. I'm about to operate. My patient is the centipede I picked up with the tweezers and am now holding up to examine under the dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. He's not from around here, is he? No, he's a drifter, maybe a rustler, maybe a gunslinger, a bad hombre, in other words, but it's not my place to judge. I'm just a doctor, and he's been shot. I can tell he's hurt bad by how still he is, only the tiny pincers waving back and forth. Tell me your name, son, I say. Okay, Horace, now you rest easy. The bullet's gone plumb through your belly. I'm gonna have to clean the wound before the germs get in. He rolls up in a ball when I place him on the table. So with the tongue depressor, I wedge him open and squeeze a drop of iodine onto his underside. And in the magnifying glass, I watch the little segments of him quiver and buckle as the ointment spreads. I want to dab him with a gauze pad, but when I move the tongue depressor, he curls up even tighter. I gently place the chest piece of the stethoscope on top of him and listen. No breath, no heartbeat, a goner. I want to feel something for him, but the room is full of the maimed and wounded, so I find another injured soul and get to work. They're all goners now, everyone who knew my uncle's story, including Jeffrey, who drifted from halfway house to institution back to halfway house until the mid-70s when he jumped to his death from a bedroom window. The story exists only in fragments I gleaned as a child by stealth and accident from whispered hints and innuendos, snatches of kitchen gossip heard from hallways, someone talking on another line when I'd pick up a phone, or overheard at night from the back seat of the car when they thought I was sleeping. It had something to do with what I saw overseas as a medic in the war, an island harbor clogged with bodies floating face down, something about a pile of burning boots, teeth drilled without lidocaine for the fun of it. And after all that, to come home to a child like that, a child no one could handle, who was never right in the head, not really, even before High returned. Even if after he returned, the child got so much worse. Still, imagine having to come home to that. 6, some miraculous change took place at death. Until you died, you should have known better. Until you died, you got what you deserved. You were your own fault, and the unforgiving stories people told behind your back, which you deciphered from their every gesture, look, and intonation, that was how they let you know just who you were and where you stood in the big picture and what needed fixing and how it was all up to you to fix it, though poor fuck that you were, you never would. But once you died, it was your story, not you, that needed fixing. And it was their job to fix it because they all knew, consciously or not, what they had done and were still doing to their own children. They knew, even the worst of them, exactly who they were. By gossiping about each other, they could reassure themselves they weren't that bad. But once you died, you became their plea for mercy. They doctored you into the person they hoped they'd be themselves in the stories told about them when they died. The screw-ups that while you lived proved you had no one but yourself to blame, now proved once you were gone how bad your luck was, how damn it, you just could never catch a break. Because everyone would someday need Doc Adams. Everyone became Doc Adams to your busted soul. 7, because God knew if no one else did what it cost them to prepare you for the world that lay in wait for you beyond the safety of your father's house. A world of Nazi bastards and Goyish boss men who, despite their glad handing, would always see you as the dirty Jew you were. Only God knew how the fathers hated themselves for what they knew they'd do again over and over, even while they promised not to. How the smack of the closed fist went on echoing inside them long into the night. Only God knew the chilly marriage bed, the ends not made to meet, the chewed on during silent meals. Day after goddamn day, the universe expanded to make room for everything only God could know. 8, there's too much damage for one old country doctor in a frontier town in a single episode of a single season. The patients pile up and the plot falters without thickening. Me, Doc Adams, stops asking for names. Me, Doc Adams, stops wondering about anybody's story. Me, Doc Adams, works mechanically without thinking to fill the tray of slots and compartments with dead roly-polies, centipedes, black ants, brown ants, flies, and spiders, which he tells himself he's sending to the lab for further study, even while he knows he's just plumb done with medicine. He closes up the bag, he locks it, returns it to the shelf, and leaves it there, safe in the dark, where it belongs, where it can do no harm. Thanks. That's all I'm going to read.
Thank you, Alan. Turn it over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, people at the University of Chicago Press, for making me this beautiful book and using this great photograph by my friend Leland Stewart on the cover. Very happy with all of this. Lines about ships at sea. People who live inland forget about ships at sea. Their massive smokestacks and tall decks, light towers, ramps, and nimble cranes, bridges, conning towers, and the high keels terrifying on the open sea to behold. The stinky ones carting trash, the tuna canning factories afloat, Japanese whalers with their eternal bad karma, battleships, aircraft carriers, transports, trawlers, freighters, barges, container vessels, and super tankers carrying LNG. Semi-illuminated, the ocean liners wait at dawn outside the port for the armada of tugboats. Down the gangplank goes the procession of passengers and crew. The captain has a pleasant smile and keeps his hand locked in a permanent wave, like Admiral Byrd frozen at the pole. On other piers, stevedores and forklift operators transfer the cargo to the acres of metal warehouses beside the gas farm. Picture the ancient crafts adrift in the mind, caravels and square riggers, argosies, barks, and brigantines, windjammers, schooners, clippers, and galleons, and the vile slavers and rum runners. Pirates still board craft in the Persian Gulf and off the Horn of Africa, but it's oil thereafter, not gold. Yet the odd yacht is sometimes found, renamed and painted, the fate of its owners guessed at with throat-crossing gestures. People who live inland forget about ships at sea. The storms on the prairie only slow the interstates. Sometimes in the night, one hears the whistle of a train, but it's nothing like the horn of a ship in the fog at sea. Lines about mountains. I just learned that mountains kill more people climbing down them than making their brave ascent, and that some have the oldest rocks on the earth. Small wonder they crumble into avalanche, having weathered eons to fall. Mountains must get tired with so many people climbing them and bored with the endless boot prints of alpinists in bright garb, the flagpoles jammed into crags, piton and foothold, the kick of the crampon. Metal ladders across crevasses. More climbers die each summer on Mont Blanc than all the Himalayas. Its summit not as perilous, but more frequented than Everest or K2. I conclude the nearer mountain is far more dangerous than the distant one, just as we are more likely to be killed by the hands of someone we know. I got a lot of complaints. Lines about rivers than the sea. I don't like to swim in rivers. Their lengths and bends trouble me. If my chest touched against river weeds, I would panic. No, I don't like to swim in rivers, but I admire them for being relentless. Even blind rivers buried under cities, or rivers that run just a few days of a year. Some rivers create borders between states and nations. Some rivers stray from their courses or are dammed from flowing to neighbors. I very much like the word estuary and the thought of boats at low tide there. And I appreciate how a river divides Pest from Buda, Minneapolis from St. Paul, or the banks someone decided were left and right. A current is like a river in the sea. When I was small, I lived along the beach. When I got caught in a riptide, a passing wave brought me home. Lines about the snow. The first snow fell before the first word. No name could be given for it or rain, or wind or fields with their winter colors. No name for cold or clouds or sun, or even the sky. But snow is different. Once it fell, it appeared to stay forever. And the nameless world was cold for a long time until the melting brought the creatures from the deep in caves out into the light. Once silent, I feared them, then screamed the first word. I'm going to keep going elemental on you. Lines about the wind. All fuss and bluster, the wind is busy. It has a long way to go, across the wide seas in one long breath, clearing its throat down the avenues of commerce. The wind is master of the clouds, sends scraps and dust along the highways. The wind can be fresh and the wind can be ill. Everyone has mixed feelings about the wind. The Scirocco, the Santa Ana, and the Mistral, which sounds like mistress and minstrel, all make you crazy. You can blame the wind when you hate your job or beat your kids, go off with your colleague for a dirty weekend, but no one likes it when the wind quits and stops the chimes in the park and stalls the sailboats in the public fountains, and the blades cease spinning on the prairie, and gutter leaves halt running toward erosion, and no breeze lifts the horse's tail or dries the sweat on a baby's neck. The letter carrier left his little truck open. The wind is blowing away my debts. Lines of evolutionary progress. Creatures of the earth, we gazed upon the sky. We straightened up and grew taller. No more thistles in the palm or knuckles in the dirt. We liked the taste of meat, and it made our brains and bodies strong. Some of us trapped the herds in canyons. Some of us ran them off the cliffs. Some of us drew their deeds in caves and lit our walls with rendered fat. I don't want to stand up. I want to lie here in a lawn chair and pretend I am back at the Tahiti bar and Saint-Tropez, where rich people go naked in the sunshine. All right, I'm just going to read two more poems. This one's called Window Peeping into the Garden of Eden. And this poem's dedicated to the late poet Linda Gregg, not because it has much to do with any of her writing, but Linda always had a talent of finding emotional pressure points and keeping conversations going around them. Like, Stuart, tell me more about your relationship with your parents. Window peeping into the Garden of Eden. Like Adam and Eve in the backyard, my parents on the lawn furniture were having at each other on a warm day on the pads under the cover of a high fence that kept out the watching eyes of neighbors, but not their son, cutting school, looking out the kitchen window to see her riding him among the roses and geraniums. I had gone to the refrigerator and was washing blueberries in the sink. After they pulled on their bathing suits, I stepped out into the garden. What could I do but offer them fruit? Lines along a wild place. I walked through the enterprise of weeds. A crow for each of us stood mounted on a fence. Sometimes I miss everyone I ever loved when their faces reflect in the hard, wide leaves of the magnolia. Their names like blossoms, and their lives once so real and fragrant, now like handkerchiefs beneath the trees. If my dog were alive, he might piss on them, and I would have to yell at him not to, if anyone were around. If anyone were around, I would tell them I had momentous news, but forgot what it is. I will ask the dogwoods to remind me what it means to live along the edges of the woods, to be promiscuous, but bear white flowers.
Thank you, Stuart. And apologies for that strange troll interruption. Going to turn it over to Peter to close out the reading. And then if anyone has questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and we will get to those after Peter's reading.
Thank you, Adrian, for all you do for our books. Randy Patilos, thank you ever for all you've done for the Phoenix series. And thank you, Seminar Co-op Bookstore. And it's a great pleasure to read with Stuart and Alan today. I will read 4 poems and come in under the finish line so we can have some question and answers conversation. This poem is called History Bitterness. And the circumstance of the poem, I suppose it's a poem about displacement and strange intersections. A fellow poet of mine at Yaddo, the artist colony in 1986, convinced me to come to the telephone booth to say hello to one of my heroes, James Baldwin, who at the time was dying of cancer in the south of France. And I got the courage up to get on the phone. My great uncle was a survivor of the Armenian genocide, and he was a bishop in the Armenian church. He wrote an extraordinary memoir about the extermination of the Armenians at the hands of the Ottoman Turkish government in 1915 behind the screen of World War I. So those things get into the intersections of this poem, History, Bitterness. A phone booth, August, Yaddo, Saratoga Springs, air of the Tiffany parlor, sour scent of empty wine bottles. My friend handed me the sweating receiver. Go ahead, say hello. What could I say to James Baldwin, who is dying in the south of France? No name in the street, Paris, Algiers, Little Rock, you can fill it in. I'm sitting at Les Deux Magots with my NY Yankees umbrella in my lap, a wide glass of wine from some vineyard of Burgundy in my hand, recalling that Baldwin sat here drinking scotch all day and writing as friends dropped by. And it hits me, just over the Pont de Sully, my great uncle sat in a big treaty room in 1919 representing Armenia. Did it exist? In a fancy hotel with others who hoped for a nation in return for slaughter. Baldwin knew Sartre and de Beauvoir. He saw Camus pass by. It was 1958, and the Algerian cabbie who dropped him off drunk on the curb was half blind from the revolution. Bang, bang, bang goes the heart. Mr. Baldwin was dying in a sensual village in the south of France. After a week at Versailles, my uncle came to that hotel room where in the closet of his head, a big white sheet floated over the Black Sea. What did rape and massacre mean? Fail-proof, shattered, bitten off words that floated over the bridge into the carnival horns of night. A few months earlier, Miles Davis passed Baldwin at Le Démagogue on his way to play for Louis Malle's En Censure pour l'Échafaud. The spurting air of love, love, love slipping from the valves, the spit and breath of night in Paris off the torpid brown Seine where Paul Celan had disappeared not long before. Hiss, hiss, hiss goes the heart. It's 1958 and Camus still walks the boulevard. The war in Algeria is daily acid in the river. What are degrees of separation? Private myths, illusions. My aunt, the surrealist, might call them chance meetings. Do we invent proximities for our need, for salvation, for love? Wilson, Clemenceau, Lloyd George, names my uncle scrawled on a map of the dispossessed on a wall in a hotel of cards where Dixieland horns played at a banquet for the Grande Armée. And the next map of Europe was shuffled with an ace in the hole. Miles Davis spent 7 hours with Louis Malle making some languid, piercing, hollow, sliding sounds in the indeterminate, dank night. No name on the street stalked him. A few years later, Baldwin moved just miles from where my father was born in Istanbul, a few years after the Armenians were expunged from Turkey and my grandparents left the ghost map on the wall. It was 1919, and the flu blew along Saint-Germain, where my grandparents met my uncle that fall. I knew Baldwin's heart went hollow, languid, and sizzled with the need to get out of America, even if it led him to the place my grandparents fled before they landed a couple miles from Baldwin's apartment in Harlem. Are these degrees of separation or just my way of thinking about that strange moment in a phone booth at an artist's colony in the summer of '86? My friend said, if you love Jimmy's work, I know he'd love to hear from you. All good news means a lot, especially at the end. What could I say to Mr. Baldwin? He'd helped me understand the bitter history that had trapped me, that was trapped in me. Istanbul, New York, Paris. No name, no street. I was sweating into the phone. Mr. Baldwin's voice was frail, but unmistakable. This is called Yellow Lilies. Looking up, a galaxy is any star skidding into black. A black hole is my love. Who knows what's in the next cushion of air? What if a hole is just a Greek urn or Sarah's paint stick spiral? It's past midsummer, and specks of light are wings of giant birds. I'll hang my torn soul on that. Take the flash of a star, the white line of a plane, hear the ocean sound of words, hum blaring horn of wind. When I wake in gray light, black rocks, cardinals, yellow lilies, cumulonimbus, the grass is drying on me. A deer's eyes burn through the pines. I have a section in this book of, I guess I'd call them odes, or kind of meditations on fruits and vegetables. They tend to be fruits and vegetables that have associations from modes of cuisine and dining and eating, but also they can take you places, historical, cultural. I have one of these, even though I've talked about fruits and vegetables, the one I want to read right now is on a meditation on matzah. That father or mother of all flatbreads. My oldest childhood friend, I fictionalized his name to Alan Schwartz, but he was Mark Schwartz, was blown out of the sky in a helicopter in the 73 Yom Kippur War. I think I've never really gotten over it. Matzah. Sometimes when I look up at the moon, I think of Alan Schwartz, in whose kitchen I sat on Passover. We were the only Christians on the block, eating corrugated sheets of bread, though it didn't feel like bread. In the evening, the moon's white light followed me home. I didn't understand what God commanded the Jews to do. At the Formica counter before the Seder, we crunched on the mother of all wafers. Out of Egypt, there was moonlight over the stillness, crisp and sweet to the tongue. Was this the bread of affliction? Years later, when Alan was shot out of the sky over the Sinai, I asked the moon, what was the no yeast of freedom? I walked for days to get to the Red Sea because Exodus led to Deuteronomy. Even now, when I'm shivering at the water's edge, the sky no more blue than ash over trees. The difference between prophecy and law is the difference between the moon and the sea. The end of the body is one half of death, the absence of moonlight, the other. This is called Eggplant. I love the white moon circles and the purple halos on a plate as the salt sweat them. The oil in the pan smoked like bad days in the Syrian desert when a moon stayed all day, when morning was a purple elegy for the last friend seen, when the fog of the riverbank rose like a holy ghost. My mother made those white moons sizzle in some egg wash and salt. Some parsley appeared from the garden, and summer evenings came with no memory, but the table with white dishes. Shining aubergine, black-skinned beauty, bitter apple. We used our hands. And just to close, with a love poem, How Much I Love You. Because your shadow walks through the wall, because my heart is a double beat, because throbbing moves around the room the way floaters spin across the eye, because the pale green of wet leaves, because the confusion of new grass, because the brush strokes are blue, because buds of azaleas spread across lawns, because daylight is water. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan, Stuart, and Peter for these wonderful readings. Everyone, let's give them a round of applause. First of all, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to.